Imagine walking up to the gates for a flight, thinking it would be like any other, only to find yourself held back. Not due to a mistake or a security problem, but because of how you look. For Naomi Ellis, an ambitious and self-assured woman, what should have been an ordinary day of travel became a moment that would challenge an entire industry. Little did the airline staff know, the woman they brushed aside wasn't just any traveler. And when her husband, Marcus, arrived at the airport, everything changed in ways no one could foresee. This is a story of accountability, justice, and the strength of standing up when things go wrong. The crowded airport terminal buzzed with the noise of people preparing to board. Flight 245 to Pine Ridge was getting ready for departure, and the boarding gate was filled with the usual excitement and anxiety of travel. Naomi Ellis, dressed in a sleek burgundy blazer, walked confidently toward the counter, her heels clicking against the tile. She carried herself with grace, her sharp suit fitting her frame perfectly, and the handbag she held in her hand was a soft, rich leather. As she adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, a gift from her husband Marcus, she smiled and handed the gate agent her boarding pass. The young agent froze, his eyes darting nervously to the pilot standing nearby. Captain Jack Hartman, a tall man with a square jaw and a confident air, leaned casually against the counter. His eyes narrowed as they lingered on Naomi. "First class?" the gate agent asked, his voice barely audible. "Yes," Naomi replied, her voice calm but assured. She had faced this hesitation before, the questioning looks, the unsure pause. But she had learned to rise above it. Years of dealing with people who underestimated her had only made her stronger. The agent scanned her ticket and was about to let her through when Captain Hartman stepped in. He placed his hand firmly on the counter, halting the process. "Excuse me, ma'am," Captain Hartman said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" Naomi turned toward him, her eyes unwavering. "Quite sure," she responded, her tone steady. Hartman chuckled, a dismissive sound. "It's just unusual to see someone traveling first class who looks like you." His words trailed off, leaving a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked, her words sharp and direct. The agent fidgeted uncomfortably, but Hartman didn't back down. "I need to verify some details before you board," he said, his eyes glinting with something more than just curiosity. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. "Since when do pilots check tickets?" she asked, her words measured. Hartman's smirk deepened. "Just making sure everything's in order," he said, clearly enjoying the spectacle of the small crowd that had begun to gather. The murmurs of the other passengers grew louder. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others looked away, unwilling to intervene. Naomi felt their gaze, but she refused to let their silence undermine her. "If there's an issue," she said, her voice clear and cutting, "I'd like to know what it is. Otherwise, I would appreciate it if you'd let me board." Hartman's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "It's a security matter," he said vaguely. "We've had some problems lately, you understand." Naomi clenched her fists in her pockets, but kept her composure. She reached for her phone, pulled it out, and dialed the number of her husband. "I need you here, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but firm. Hartman laughed under his breath, a mocking sound. "Oh, I'm sure a phone call won't change anything," he sneered. Naomi didn't respond. She hung up and slipped the phone back into her bag. "I'll wait," she said, her voice calm as ever, her stance unbroken. The tension in the air grew thick as the minutes passed. Passengers exchanged whispers, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Naomi stood tall, her gaze fixed firmly on the entrance. Then Marcus Ellis arrived, tall, commanding, and dressed in a sharp black suit. Marcus cut through the crowd with ease. His presence was magnetic. There was no mistaking the power he exuded. His eyes locked onto Naomi immediately, noting the tension in her posture. Without saying a word, he moved toward her, and the surrounding passengers instinctively made way. His anger, though controlled, was evident. He had always protected Naomi, and this time was no different. "Naomi," he said softly, his voice like a rock in a storm. She nodded, her face showing a mixture of relief and resolve. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Marcus turned his eyes toward Captain Hartman, who was still standing near the counter with a cocky grin, unaware of the storm he had just invited. But that was about to change. "Naomi's not boarding until I get an explanation," Marcus said, his tone smooth but firm. The gate agent, who had been nervously looking at Hartman for guidance, began to stutter. Hartman, still confident, stepped forward. "I'm just ensuring the safety of my passengers," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with arrogance. There were concerns raised about her. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Concerns? She's got a valid ticket. What's the issue?" Hartman hesitated, then spoke defensively. "I have the authority to ensure safety. This is my flight." Marcus' voice dropped cold as ice. "And what exactly about my wife makes her a safety risk?" Hartman's confidence wavered, but he quickly recovered. "I'm not obligated to explain myself to you." Marcus took a step forward, towering over him. "You are now." The crowd held its breath. Hartman's smirk faltered, replaced by a defensive posture. "And who exactly are you to demand that?" Hartman sneered. Marcus' gaze was unflinching. "Marcus Ellis," he said, his voice calm but laced with authority. "Owner of this airline." The atmosphere shifted. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the gate agent's face paled. Hartman's cocky grin disappeared, replaced by disbelief. Before Hartman could respond, Marcus continued, his voice slicing through the tension. "Your actions today have not only disrespected my wife, but they've also threatened the reputation of my company. I demand an explanation right now." Hartman's bravado crumbled. "I was just following protocol," he stammered. Marcus' words were sharp, like a whip. "This isn't protocol. This is racism. And it ends right here." Hartman's face turned crimson as he tried to backpedal. "I wasn't trying to." "You were trying to belittle my wife," Marcus interrupted. "And I won't let that stand." Naomi, who had been quiet up until now, stepped forward, her voice low but filled with conviction. "I've dealt with men like you before," she said calmly. "You think your position gives you power over others. But you've just made the mistake of crossing a line." Hartman's confidence was shattered. "It was just a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice trembling. Marcus' eyes turned to ice. "The only misunderstanding here is that you thought your behavior would go unchecked. Security will escort you off this flight. Consider this your last day on duty." The crowd gasped. Hartman stood frozen, his face red with rage and humiliation. "You can't be serious," he muttered under his breath. As Marcus Ellis stood there, his presence overwhelming the tension in the air, it was clear that the events of the day had irrevocably shifted the balance of power at that gate. Naomi's posture, once tense, now seemed to relax, as though the weight she'd carried was finally lifted. The power of standing up to injustice was not just about the words spoken, but the actions taken. And today, those actions had rippled outwards beyond the confines of that gate. The other passengers, once silent and uncertain, began to murmur amongst themselves. What had started as a quiet confrontation had transformed into something far larger, a lesson in dignity, authority, and respect. Naomi's refusal to shrink in the face of adversity had inspired others to examine their own reactions in moments of unfairness. In truth, her strength had become a beacon for anyone who had ever been overlooked or dismissed because of their appearance, background, or identity. Captain Hartman, now thoroughly humiliated, was escorted away by security, his authority shattered in an instant. His arrogance, once a shield that allowed him to trample over others, had crumbled under the weight of a single man's simple request for justice. It wasn't just Marcus' name that had changed the course of the situation. It was his refusal to let someone treat his wife with disrespect, and by extension, his refusal to let any form of bigotry stand unchallenged.